He thought the stop would be like any other, routine, uneventful, and completely under his control. A few sharp words, a hint of intimidation, and maybe a sprinkle of humiliation, just to remind me who was in charge. But when he pried open my trunk and his eyes locked onto a document he wasn't expecting to see, one that could shatter his sense of power, I knew the night had taken a turn he'd never forget. Sometimes, the hunter becomes the hunted, and that night, it was his turn to learn a lesson he'd carry for a lifetime. Have you ever had that gut feeling, the kind where something feels off even before anything actually happens? Like the heavy, eerie stillness that settles right before a thunderstorm breaks? That was me, cruising down Main Street under a drizzling sky. The rain wasn't heavy, but it was persistent, blurring my windshield despite the wiper's best efforts. Something felt wrong, a weight in the air that I couldn't shake. It had been a grueling day, the kind that drains every ounce of energy from you, leaving your brain feeling like it's on autopilot. All I wanted was to get home, step into a hot shower, and let the silence soothe me. But fate had other plans. Out of nowhere, the piercing flash of red and blue lights filled my rearview mirror, accompanied by the ominous wail of a police siren. My stomach dropped. "Here we go," I muttered under my breath. My pulse quickened as I pulled over to the side of the road. I hadn't been speeding. My taillights were perfectly fine. My plates? Completely in order. So what was the reason? But then it hit me, driving while black. A classic scenario I'd seen too many times before. I immediately went into autopilot, placing my hands firmly at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. We all know the drill. You can't afford even the smallest mistake in situations like this. The cruiser came to a halt behind me, and I watched through my side mirror as the officer emerged. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with an air of authority that practically screamed, "I run this town." His boots crunched against the wet pavement as he approached, his uniform crisp and his expression unreadable. "License and registration," he barked the moment he reached my window. No pleasantries, no good evening, just a sharp, no-nonsense demand, as if I was already guilty of some heinous crime. "Good evening, officer," I replied, keeping my voice calm and steady. "Can I ask why you pulled me over?" "You were driving suspiciously slow," he shot back, squinting at me like I'd just insulted his intelligence. I blinked, confused. Suspiciously slow? Was that even a thing? "It's raining," I explained, my tone measured. "I was just being careful." He leaned in closer, droplets of water sliding off the brim of his hat. "Careful, huh? You hiding something in this car, pal?" And there it was, that loaded word, pal. Not sir, not mister, just pal, with enough condescension to fill a stadium. "Officer, I don't have anything to hide," I said evenly, refusing to let him bait me. I reached toward the glove compartment, slowly, deliberately, to grab my license and registration. The last thing I needed was for him to misinterpret my movements. He snatched the documents from my hand, barely glancing at them before stomping back to his cruiser, without another word. I sat there, staring into the side mirror, my gut telling me this wasn't over. His body language, his tone, everything about him screamed that he was itching for a reason to escalate. When he returned, his face was tighter, his frustration barely concealed. He hadn't found anything to justify his suspicion, and it clearly bothered him. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered, his tone leaving no room for debate. "What's the reason, officers?" I asked, keeping my voice polite but firm. "I haven't done anything wrong."
"Step out of the
vehicle," he repeated, emphasizing each word like I was a child who needed instructions spelled out. Suppressing a sigh, I complied, stepping into the drizzle. The cold rain seeped through my jacket instantly, sending a shiver down my spine. "Open the trunk," he demanded, his tone sharp. "With all due respect, officer, you need a warrant for that," I replied. His lips curled into a smug grin, the kind that made my stomach churn. "That's where you're wrong," he sneered. "I can check whatever I damn well please." "Actually, no, you can't," I countered, my voice steady. But he wasn't listening. He marched to the back of the car, fumbling with his keyring like he owned the place. "Officer, this is a violation of my rights." I called out, louder this time, but it was like shouting into the void. With a snap, he popped the trunk open. His eyes landed on a sleek gray document case tucked neatly in the corner. "What's this?" he asked, his tone now tinged with suspicion and curiosity. "It's personal property," I said sharply. "You have no right." But he was already reaching for it. My heart pounded as he unlatched the case. For a moment, I almost laughed at the irony. He had no idea what he was about to uncover. He looked eager, like a child tearing into a birthday gift, his eyes wide with anticipation. But then freeze. His face turned an unnatural shade of pale, like all the blood had just drained from it. His eyes darted over the document, scanning it frantically, and whatever little confidence he'd had evaporated in the blink of an eye. His hands trembled slightly as he brought the paper closer, as if somehow expecting it to vanish, or turn into something more manageable. "Officer Thomas H. Hendrick," I said, watching as the realization sank in. I could practically hear the gears in his head grinding to a halt. "Do you want to explain why you just violated the rights of your new boss? Let me tell you something about officers like Hendrick. They don't know when to quit." It's like he thought he had cracked the biggest case of his career, when in reality, all he had was a trunk full of nothing. Well, nothing except for that gray document case. Now, when I first saw him pull it out, I felt this strange mix of frustration and excitement. Yeah, I'll admit it. Part of me was intrigued. I wanted to see just how this would play out because, let's be honest, Hendrick had no idea the storm he'd just walked into. "What's in here, huh?" he asked, holding up the case like it was some kind of trophy. That cocky smirk of his was back, but it was less convincing now. It was like he was trying to convince himself that he was still in control. "Put it down," I said, my voice calm, even though everything inside me screamed, "That's private property, and you're way out of line." Naturally, he ignored me, which, shocker, wasn't surprising. He popped open the latches, and the case clicked open with a soft snap. He flipped it open, eager to see what treasure was inside. And that's when the magic happened. His eyes landed on the first sheet of paper. You would have thought he'd just seen a ghost. The color drained from his face so fast, I honestly expected him to faint right there in the rain. He squinted at the document, blinked a few times, as if hoping it would magically change into something else. "Wait a minute, what the hell is this?" he muttered under his breath, but I heard him loud and clear. His voice had lost all that bravado. It was shaky, uncertain, and I couldn't help but relish in the turn of events. Oh, how the tables had turned. "What's the matter, Officer Hendrick?" I asked, casually leaning against my car. "Something catch your eye?" He didn't answer. His hands were visibly trembling as he held the paper even closer to his face, like he was trying to read it better, but I could already see the words clearly from where I stood. The top of the document was unmistakable, "Notice of Termination." Beneath that, in bold, clear letters, was his name, followed by a list of offenses that would make any employer think twice about hiring him, even for a babysitting gig. This can't be real," he stammered, his voice barely audible, his eyes wide in disbelief. He looked up at me then, and I swear, I've never seen a man go from cocky to terrified in such a short span. "What the hell is this?" He almost choked on the words, panic creeping into his voice. "That, my friend," I said with a slow, deliberate smile, crossing my arms, "is a very official document. And you're holding it without permission?" His eyes widened even more, blinking at me like I'd just spoken in ancient Greek. "Permission? You what? What the hell is going on here?" he sputtered, his mind racing to catch up with the situation. "Why don't you read the whole thing, officer?" I suggested, nodding toward the paper, my tone light but with a hint of sarcasm. "Might clear up some of your confusion." I could practically see the wheels turning in his head, and let me tell you, they were squeaking under the pressure. His eyes darted back to the paper, scanning it frantically as the words started to sink in. The offenses, the complaints, the recommendation for immediate dismissal. It all led up to the final line, the signature at the bottom. "James Peterson, Chief of Police." Hendrik blinked, his mouth opening and closing like he was struggling to form words. You're he stuttered, his voice wavering as if he was on the verge of a breakdown. This can't be real, he whispered, his voice trembling. You're not. I'm not what? I raised an eyebrow, leaning in closer. I'm your new boss. Sorry to disappoint, but yeah, that's exactly who I am. His mouth flopped open, but no words came out. It was like watching a fish flop around on dry land, gasping for air. And honestly, I was living for it. This has to be a mistake. He finally managed to gasp, his face pale as the rain continued to fall. You're not supposed to. I mean, you're... Let me stop you right there, I interrupted, holding up a hand. Before you say something even dumber? Then what's already come out of your mouth, I snapped. I was brought in to clean up this department, and guess what?
Your name was at the top of my list.
His hands fell to his sides, the paper still gripped tightly in his shaking fingers. He looked like someone had hit him with a freight train, completely blindsided. But even with his world crumbling, he tried to salvage what he could. But look, he started, his voice pleading, we can work this out. I didn't mean anything by it. Oh, you didn't mean anything by it? I interrupted, my voice dripping with sarcasm. So when you pulled me over for absolutely no reason, searched my car without a warrant, and violated my private property, that was just a big misunderstanding? He shifted, his desperation clear. Come on, man, I didn't know who you were. And that makes it okay? I shot back. What if I wasn't your boss? Would that make your actions acceptable? Because I've got to tell you, Hendrik, that's not how the law works anymore. His face twisted with panic, disbelief washing over him like a tidal wave. His mind was probably racing, scrambling to find some way out of the mess he'd just dug for himself. Spoiler alert, there was no way out. Please, he whispered, his voice trembling. Just give me a chance to explain. I shook my head slowly. Oh, don't worry, Hendrik, you'll get your chance to explain.
Just not to me.
And with that, I pulled out my phone, dialing the number that would seal his fate. The call I'd been holding on to for this exact moment. The rain poured down, but for the first time that night, I felt in complete control. So there we were. Me, standing calm as a cucumber in the rain. Officer Hendrik, drenched, looking like he'd been run over by a bus. The paper in his hands might as well have been on fire, given how quickly he dropped it back into the document case. He opened his mouth, probably to offer a last-ditch excuse or some desperate plea, but I wasn't about to give him the satisfaction. Go ahead, I said, crossing my arms, leaning casually against my car. Say whatever it is you think will save your job. I could use the laugh. His voice shook, like a leaf in the wind. This was just a misunderstanding, okay? I didn't know who you were. Oh, so it's okay to violate someone's rights as long as they're not your boss? I interrupted, my tone cutting through the air like a knife. Because that's what I'm hearing, Hendrik. Am I wrong? He blinked, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. No, that's not. Look, I cut him off. I'm just saying, maybe we don't have to take this any further. I can fix this. I'll apologize. I'll apologize? I let out a bitter laugh. That's rich. Tell me, Hendrik, how many people have you pulled this stunt on before? How many people didn't have a document in their trunk to force you to backpedal like this? His silence spoke volumes. He looked down at the pavement, as if the ground itself might offer him an answer. But we both knew the truth. This wasn't his first rodeo. And it wouldn't have been his last if he hadn't run into me. Yeah, that's what I thought, I said, shaking my head. You're not sorry you did it. You're sorry you got caught. Come on, man, he said, his voice dripping with desperation. You've got to understand this job, it's all I've got. I made a mistake, okay? But I can learn. I can change. Just don't do this. I stared at him, letting his words linger in the air between us. The rain continued to fall, soaking both of us, but I didn't care. This wasn't about him. It was about the people who came before me, the ones who never got the chance to stand up for themselves, the ones who didn't have the power to say enough. You want to change? I asked finally, my voice steady and cold. Then prove it. But you're not doing it in my department. His face crumpled like a piece of paper. For a second, I thought he might actually start crying. "You can't do this," he whispered, barely audible. "I need this job." "No," I said, shaking my head. "What you needed was a wake-up call. And consider this it." I pulled out my phone and dialed the number I'd been saving for this moment. It rang once before a familiar voice answered. "Chief Peterson," came the crisp greeting on the other end. "It's me," I said. "I've got Officer Hendrick here with me. Effective immediately. He's terminated. Notify HR and make sure the paperwork's expedited." Hendrick's eyes widened as the reality hit him like a freight train. Wait, you don't have to do this," he stammered, panic rising in his voice. "Please, I'll do whatever you want." I held my hand up, silencing him. "It's done, Hendrick. Pack your things. Turn in your badge and gun by the end of the day. Don't even think about appealing. The complaints against you are well documented." I ended the call without waiting for a response. When I looked back at Hendrick, he was frozen in place, his face pale and twisted with sheer terror. It was the kind of look you'd expect from someone who just realized their worst nightmare had come true. "Here's a tip," I said, stepping closer to him. "Next time you put on a uniform, if anyone's ever foolish enough to give you another one, remember what it's supposed to stand for. Protect and serve, not harass and intimidate."
He didn't respond.
He just stood there, soaked to the bone, defeated. I picked up the document case, closed the trunk, and walked away.